Finding the real China, coming up on this week's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report for the 6th of November 2025. I'm Elisa Barwick. Joining me today is Citizens Party Chairman Robert Barwick. Welcome, Robbie.
Thanks, Elisa.
And welcome back.
Thank you.
Now, on this week's show, we're going to be discussing our recent trip to China, the China Study and Goodwill Tour.
The China threat, the China opportunity, all things China.
Yes.
And for the first time ever, first-hand eyewitness accounts. Haven't been to China before, talked about it a lot for 10 years.
Yeah.
So first experience.
It's no longer theoretical.
Yeah.
So, stay tuned for all those details. We'll have some updates first, however, on our various
And pretty
campaigns.
mind-blowing stuff too we'll be going through.
Yeah, very much so. Now, please help us circulate this information as widely as possible by hitting the like button, making a comment below, and sharing this show across social media platforms. Subscribe, of course, if you're not already a subscriber, and hit the notification bell to be updated of new material coming through. Please consider making a donation so we can continue to do all the work that we're doing to transform Australia, which is absolutely urgent. You can find the link below to donate and also to subscribe to our Australian Alert, the weekly publication, which puts all the backup material and research that we are just taking the very tip of the iceberg in the show. And also join as a member. We are registering currently, finalising registration in South Australia and New South Wales, onto Victoria and other states in earnest.
And this is part of our overall membership drive to go from being a pretty hardy little minor party in Australia, but one of long standing, 37 years. However, we need to grow ourselves into a major party so that we can take our approach into Parliament. And you need numbers. And so we need you, sign up, become a member of the Citizens Party, get behind this operation and go places with us.
Yeah, I mean, we can really say that there's no political movement in this country that has the kind of reach that we have when it comes to actually mobilising citizens to do actual stuff, whether it be meeting with their politicians, writing submissions, engaging at that political level, which makes an impact on policy. But it's just a matter of translating that into actual memberships on the kind of bureaucratic side, I guess you could say. So if you haven't joined as a member, please do so. Now, speaking of those campaigns, let's run through a few updates. First of all, on the cash mandate. Now, when we sat in this chair 1 week ago, myself and Richard, the submissions were just closing. The following day, we record on the Thursday. On the Friday, the submissions to the Treasury's consultation on their cash allowance bill, which supposedly meant to mandate businesses to accept cash, but it was so riddled with exemptions, we were protesting it because we were saying, look, this is going to effectively give most businesses in Australia the justification to refuse cash because they don't have access to banks, etc.
It's a Clayton's mandate that's worse than no mandate at all.
Yes. And so some people the next day, once the show went up, commented that around or before lunchtime, the Treasury portal accepting those submissions actually closed down and we're not taking them, where usually they are open to the close of business. And important people like Dale Webster, who's led this campaign, was not able to get their submission in. So furiously people started calling Treasury and saying, hang on, what's going on here? And there was such a blowback. Not only did they reopen the submissions portal, they extended it by 1 week.
Yes.
Now that by the time you're watching this show, again, that will have expired, but we put out a press statement and various other notifications during the week telling people that they could continue to make those submissions. So, you get little victories like that because of the pressure we're able to bring to bear.
Yeah. And what we're doing is forcing, the government doesn't want to consult. They go through the motions on this stuff.
Yeah.
They've got the game sewn up anyway. They're just a bigger version of what Bank West said in one of the hearings of the Senate inquiry into bank closures back in 2020. I think it was the 2023 hearing in Beverley. The Bank West executives were being asked why they didn't consult with the town about closing the branch. And the Bank West executive was rather honest. He goes, well, what's the point of consulting when we're not going to change our mind?
Exactly.
Right? So the government's like that. And in this particular case, Elisa, this started off, we've written about this in the alert. Remember, this whole idea of a cash mandate, which exists around the world, we're going to talk about one in a minute, but this started off with a bill from Bob Catter. Andrew G introduced it, independent member in New South Wales. Bob Catter seconded it. Elisa supported it. So 3 independents. And this was a bill for a mandate on all businesses to accept cash up to $10,000, right, with only reasonable exemptions. And Jim Chalmers turned that into this mandate he's announced, which is that only large supermarket chains and fill stations will be mandated to accept cash, only up to $500, and all small businesses exempt, right? And we make the point that that's what happens. How does it go from the original bill to that? That's what happens when you filter it through the banks, right? So because the government has a problem. We have successfully made such a big deal about cash for the last few years that, and starting with, it all started with Scott Morrison's attempt to ban cash transactions over $10,000, which we beat in 2019, 2020. And then it's become a hot button issue. So the government understands that they cannot, it'll be suicide for them if they go down the path of restricting cash.
Yeah. But
the banks want to. The banks absolutely want to. And in 2023, the banks bragged about this. We'll put an image on the screen. The banks actually, the headline of the bank article was, "Banks cull branches in shift to a cashless society." James Ayres reported, major banks are accelerating the push for a cashless society by trying to encourage regional communities to eliminate cash from country events. They had 4 top executives from each of the big banks in that meeting, and they're all boasting about it. This is April 2023. They're boasting, we're going cashless, man. We're going to make all these towns go cashless. This is going to be great. Because that was only the beginning of the Senate inquiry, I would say, Elisa, you would not see a bank game to be that explicit now.
No.
Right? They know that, just she's not there anymore as the CEO of the Banking Association, but Anna Bligh, even by the end, no, we support cash. Garbage.
Yep.
They had to change their PR because they're bloody liars, and they've been what they admitted in that article is by closing branches, etc. The whole agenda was to force us cashless because then every transaction goes through their computers and they can take a cut, they can levy a charge on every transaction, and of course they get all our data. They get to spy on everything we do, right? And they can monetize that data and do all kinds of things to it. So the government is like, well, we can't be offside with the public on this. We've got to look like we support cash, but we serve the banks. They're our masters. Jim Chalmers, he's on his knees every day in front of the banks, right? And so they come up with this Clayton's mandate that, like I said, is worse than no mandate at all. And when they came up with it, it came out of an original consultation process where they got a few, dozens of submissions from institutions, 4,000 submissions from individuals. The 4,000 submissions from individuals would have been all the same type. You must protect cash. The institutions would have included banks saying, no, you don't want to do that. They said, this government themselves said, we only took notice of the submissions from institutions, not from individuals. And they've even lied about the fact they don't want to disclose what the individual said. They haven't released the submissions from individuals because they're not interested in what they have to say, right? And so this is the same process, and that's why they closed that's why Treasury, in a blasé fashion, closed the portal early, even though it's supposed to stay up until midnight, and they copped a backlash. And that's we were talking about before with the membership thing. That's the kind of force that we can bring.
Yes.
We just got to do it on a bigger scale. And for us in the Citizens Party, I always try to reiterate this to people. The reason we're on this issue, Elisa, is because the cash issue is all about the power of the banks. The banks already have too much power in Australia. If you get rid of cash and everyone has to go through the banks, they'll have absolute power, right? And we have to stop that. We've got to break the power of the banks, one, by preserving cash, two, by bringing in a public bank.
Yes. Now, just on what you can still do about this new amended regulation is expected to be tabled somewhere around the end of this month, and between then and the final sitting of Parliament, any MP can put up a motion to disallow it, and that can then invoke a debate on the subject, and the Parliament can vote on it and vote to not allow it. So what we want people to do, and we'll put up a link to the statement which gives you the details, is to call your senators, because it's in the Senate where that vote would be successful, to block such a regulation going through. Otherwise, this will all be implemented on the 1st of January 2026. So we still have a chance to stop it, as long as they don't wait until the very last minute to put it through. We have to be on top of this. So get onto your senators now.
Yeah, Malcolm Roberts has said he's going to move. He's going to submit a disallowance motion. We need to get the Greens and the Coalition to support that disallowance motion. It'll stop this. Because, as I said, no mandate is better than this Clayton's mandate. But what you tell people is we need something better. We need the proper mandate that was in the bill that the independents put up. We need the government to respond to the Senate inquiry into bank closures in regional Australia, and specifically respond to the first two recommendations, because the solution is in there. One is call access to banking services and cash an essential service, right? And then that puts a legal obligation on all the institutions involved, including the government, to supply it. And the second one is establish an expert panel for a public bank, including a public bank that operates through post offices.
Yes.
And that solves the number one problem of cash, which is the availability that the banks have tried to get rid of through closing branches.
Yes. Now, speaking of which, we did draw attention to this last week, and we've reported again in our Australian Alert, talking about postal banks. The fact, and it's great to have a example of how it's done differently elsewhere to refer to, because it was certainly the case in China. We'll talk about it more in when we get into the details of our China trip. And we'll put up photos, because we saw a lot of branches of the Postal Savings Bank of China. So they have that capacity where if there's no other banks, which is certainly not the case, because there's banks of all kinds.
Bank branches everywhere in China.
And many of them specific to the city that you're in, the bank of that particular city or state, I should say province.
And they have much better internet coverage in China. They've got the best 5G in the world, all over the place. It's perfect coverage. They've got the best, most sophisticated payment system in the world through WeChat and Alipay. You could literally be digital 100% if you wanted to, yet they still provide branches everywhere of their banks, and they mandate 100% cash acceptance everywhere as well.
Yeah, exactly, as we talked about last week. So, businesses will and are routinely fined if they refuse to accept cash. It's part of the law over there. So these things can be done in the correct way. But let's just talk about, on another update, Australia Post briefly, because, we want to have a postal savings bank here in Australia that operates through the post offices. But at the moment, Australia Post is hemorrhaging capabilities to do that.
Well, we're racing the clock, because Australia Post, as we keep highlighting, is shutting down as many post offices as they can. And everyone they shut down reduces its capacity, as you said, right? They started off with, there was at least 4,350 post offices when Christine Holgate was the CEO. They're now down to less than 4,000. They're less than 4,200 now, and they've said that they're going to go to 4,000, right? And that's just because they can by law, because they have an obligation to maintain at least 4,000, right? And so they're going to reduce it to the bare minimum. And then what's happening is there's all these regional licensed post offices that are run as small businesses. The owners are trying to sell their licenses so they can retire and whatever. And because Australia Post has deliberately made these businesses unattractive, they're finding it hard to sell the licenses. And so you get these recurring news reports, the license will just expire, and the town, that particular town, will lose its post office, right? So this is sabotage. These are executives from Woolworths, Subway, and what was the other one? KFC, I think, or McDonald's, right? Who are now running Australia Post, and they're running it into the ground, deliberately running it into the ground. They're destroying this business, which is our service. It's 100% owned by the taxpayers. They're destroying it, yet the people doing it are being paid mega fat bonuses.
Yep.
Absolutely fat bonuses to do it.
So they just got, Australia Post has just inched back into the red by
Barely.
shutting branches and slashing jobs. And this was reported in the AFR Rear Window this week column. Executive wages increased by 34%. Bonuses increased by 95%. So you've got, and even non-CEO level managers are being paid significantly north of $1 million, which is about 16 times the salary
A whole bunch of them are on $1.6, $1.7 million. The CEO himself is on $3.3 or $3.4 million. These are nobodies, by the way. So Australians, when they hear what public service chiefs get, like, you know, the heads of departments of our federal public service departments, right? They get like anywhere from, say, $800,000, $900,000, $1 million. The CEOs of Australia's big universities are paid about $1 million. And Australians are rightly shocked at that, right? Who earns that? Who deserves that kind of money?
Yeah.
Yet these unknown people who run Australia Post, right? These lower tier executives are being paid millions because it's told you've got to operate on a commercial basis. And they're running it into the ground and no one's saying anything. So we have to rescue this very important service. I always felt bad when we got involved in the Christine Holgate issue because I personally had never paid attention to Australia Post before. It is a very fundamentally essential service in Australia. We can save it by combining it with an essential banking service in the form of a government bank. That is the win-win solution here. That fixes banking and postal services for Australians for all time, right? The only people who don't like it are the CEOs of the banks, and for some goddamn unknown reason, the CEO of Australia Post, right? And, you know, people should get mad about this and get behind our campaign to get this solution implemented. And if they want to get in the way, clear them out.
Now, shifting topics slightly before we head into our major topic, and it does lead into it actually because it brings us to the point today where we're facing permanent wars across the globe and the demonisation of major economies like China and Russia. Dick Cheney died this week.
Woohoo! 25 years too late, though, Elisa. There's 1 million dead Iraqis, and then that's all the deaths from the chain reaction that set off thanks to this guy. And you know, one of the things that I have a reputation for ranting about is because it's because of the infuriating double standards that get applied to geopolitics, right? So since 2022, we have had politicians repeat ad nauseum, led by our current Prime Minister, that attacking on Putin's immoral, illegal, unprovoked attack on Ukraine. Go and look at now, just pay attention yourself, but look at how many of those same people will be eulogising Dick Cheney. Yet Dick Cheney used his position. First of all, he ran George W. Bush, biggest buffoon in American, like he's the dumbest president in history. He didn't run the show. Dick Cheney ran the show. Dick Cheney is a sinister operative in American politics going back to the 60s because he was one of these neocons. He was one of the original neoconservatives that came out of the office of this Democratic Senator Henry Skip Jackson, who spawned all these bastards into the American levels of the American government. When he's the guy whose office when he was the defense minister at the end of the first Gulf War in the early 90s, he was the defense secretary, his office, his undersecretary of defense was Paul Wolfowitz. That office produced this defense policy guidance, which became America's foreign policy doctrine till this day. And that doctrine was, we will not tolerate the rise of any rival economic or military power. There will only be one superpower in this world, and that's us. And Even Joe Biden at the time denounced it as Pax Americana, right? You guys are declaring an American empire. But Joe Biden got in line and everyone got in line. And by defining American foreign policy that way, what you're saying is you will kill any country that tries to get in your way. And of course, what's happened now, and it's not even getting in your way, it's just being a rival. And what's happened now is China is rising because it hasn't gone to wars around the world. It's focused on its economy. It is rising. And so by definition, America says, well, we can't tolerate that. We have to have global hegemony ourselves. So we're going to, we have to fight China or get suckers like Australia to fight China for us. That all came out of Dick Cheney's office, right? And then, of course, the real crime was in 2001. I've always had a question. Let me be a little bit conspiratorial here. You know, if you're old enough, you probably have seen all the different versions of what happened on 9/11. But one of those, while George W. Bush was in Air Force One in the sky, Dick Cheney was in the basement at the White House calling the shots. And there's always been a question mark in my mind over the various orders he gave that day, including possibly on the fourth aircraft that was on its way to Washington, supposedly. Anyway, because Dick Cheney is one of those guys that, you know, his whole sort of like brand is he's the guy who can make the hard decisions, right? To put America's interests first. He'll make the hard decisions. How many people, doesn't matter how many people you kill, as long as America's interests are first. That's the Dick Cheney kind of brand. And then he personally dictated to the CIA to come up with the lies of weapons of mass destruction. And of course, the CIA was assisted by the only person in the world that ranks as bad as Dick Cheney is Tony Blair to actually do that. And I'll end my little thing about Cheney on this one point. There's only two people in the world, Elisa, that seriously tried to make the claim that Saddam Hussein was tied to Al Qaeda, which was the most ludicrous claim. But when America invaded Iraq, some ridiculous opinion poll showed that something like 75% of Americans assumed Iraq had something to do with 9/11, whereas everybody in the world knew Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden had two bitter enemies. One was Gaddafi in Libya, and the other one was Saddam Hussein, right? There was no truck between them whatsoever. It was the biggest damn lie ever, but it was put out deliberately to just to keep the public brainwashed. Two people made that claim in an official capacity. One was Dick Cheney. The other one was John Winston Howard, the dirtbag John Winston Howard. Also made that claim. He would have made it under orders to back up the garbage coming out of Cheney's office. They deliberately, it wasn't faulty intelligence. You're going to be reading media at the moment. They'll talk about Cheney's position on weapons of mass destruction. They'll call it faulty intelligence. Garbage. They deliberately cooked up the lies to make these claims so they could get the war that they wanted. And what they set off was by getting that war, they set off a chain of events that killed 1 million Iraqis, at least, and unleashed ISIS, unleashed Al Qaeda in the Middle East, and gave us the 20 years of chaos in the Middle East and North Africa that's still going on today. Dick Cheney, rotten hell.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the main topic today, and a little bit more optimistic for a better future than what we've seen in these recent years, and that warmongering and a key impetus of this topic is to prevent another war. So our topic is finding the real China, and we're reporting here on the trip that you and I made to 9 cities in China, along with 18 or so other people.
One of whom was our son. We dragged him along, give him a bit of cultural experience, which was great.
So these are the cities we went to. We went to Hainan province and travelled a fair bit around the island there.
We called it the China Study and Goodwill Tour.
Yes. And
it was a really good title because it was a study tour. We wanted to see China for ourselves, and we were doing it with goodwill.
And some of the pictures you'll see, we have that banner on arrival at most of the airports. So after Hainan Island, we went to Nanjing, We went to Shanghai, Hangzhou, Shenzhen, Xi'an, Chongqing, and then you went to Changsha and Beijing. So went to a lot of places in a short space of time.
Yeah, it was pretty grueling actually, and fitting those in 20 days was quite an achievement. Our Sydney travel agent, who's an Australian citizen but born in China, Richard Yuan, it was a minor miracle what he pulled off, but the way he crammed everything in was extraordinary, and we had to just sort of go along with it. But anyway, it worked out. It was great.
Oh, absolutely amazing. And of course, the idea of this trip, and we will do more similar ones in future that are open to anyone who wants to go, is to present the real China to people.
Well, and let me say now, because I want to bookend with this, but I want to say it now. Yeah, my conclusion from going there is I don't really want to have all these arguments about China anymore. My main argument is go see it for yourself. It's not expensive. Go see it for yourself. I think all Australians, there's 30-day visa-free travel to China. All Australians should look at an opportunity to go to China. Just see it for yourself. And what we will do as a political party is we will continue to encourage people to participate in these organised tours. Hopefully, we might even be able to do it twice a year. And if you're interested, get in touch with us, and we'll let you know when the next one is planned, etc. Because we'll describe now how that went. Yeah. But you get access that a normal tourist wouldn't necessarily get to see. And it's just mind-blowing, right? So if you want that kind of thing, we'll tell you more, and we'll keep promoting it as we go along.
So we're going to cover a number of subject areas quite broadly because it's difficult to cover everything. So we'll just draw out highlights from the various areas. But the first being the history of China and intersecting, of course, the history of the world. And so we were able to attend some amazing museums that laid out in pictorial form and obviously with exhibitions and so forth, the history of ancient China, the unification of China and its founding as a modern nation state, the development of its modern political system. So these are all, fascinating things to get a real picture of China, which most people in Australia simply do not have in any form.
And my brief comment on the ancient stuff is you get a real appreciation that, as some people say, China's not a country, it's a civilization. And it's quite a homogenous civilization in the sense that you can tell wherever you are in the world, you can tell when you meet Chinese people, right? And whatever their view is of the politics or whatever, doesn't matter. They're all part of the civilization that has very, very old roots going back thousands and thousands of years. And they've been influenced by that culture that's handed down to this day through people like Confucius and everything else like that. And one of the things that is interesting about Chinese history is, the Chinese have always kept records, right? And so their record keeping and their systems for doing that there's a lot of integrity in them, and you can actually see what they've learned over these years, and they've applied it. And if I can give just an example of that, forget everything else. Look at Chinese food. Chinese food. There's nothing that Chinese don't know how to cook. And they've found the perfect way to cook it. I mean, they eat things that you don't eat in the West. But, when a lot of people are struggling to find food, they find ways to eat everything.
And to make it taste good. And that's thousands of years of experience that you get presented on your plate in the 21st century. Literally thousands of years of experience. And so that's just one facet. A lot of China is similar to that. Yeah.
That's its history.
And one of the things that's also really clear by going through the museums, and we went to several, is, that they honour the process of transformation. They acknowledge the errors, the mistakes, and they, it's really obvious just from reading the commentary going through the museums that they're very committed to learning from their mistakes, learning from history. That was something, if you look at the statement on the memorial at the Nanjing memorial of the massacre there. I forget the exact translation, but we'll put it up on the screen, where they talked about honouring the past and learning from history to keep peace, to have peace in the world being so important.
And Elisa, it was probably the history of most interest to us was the World War II history, because it's the 80th anniversary since the end of World War II, etc. There was all these events leading up to just before we got to go to China, and so we acknowledge that history by two things. We went where we landed in Hainan, which is the island. We drove clear across it to this small city called Dongfang, and just outside the city there's this tiny village which has a memorial to Australian soldiers who died in World War II. And General Peter Cosgrove, actually, when he was the Governor General, was involved in acknowledging this, because there was Australian soldiers associated with this thing called the Gulf Force that had been deployed in Indonesia, but the Japanese just totally annihilated them, and they took hundreds of them as prisoners of war to Hainan Island. And some of them escaped, and they were supported by the Chinese resistance fighters on Hainan Island. And so there's a place where two of them have died, and so the local villagers have built a memorial there that assisted with the Australian government. So we got to go there. I spoke. John Lander spoke, who was the first deputy ambassador to China when Australia opened up relations there. Sandra Perez also spoke, and Sandra's a documentary filmmaker who's done documentaries on Australia and China in World War II, including about the Delphram dispute that we talked about a few weeks ago, where Australian unionists went on strike to stop loading pig iron. It's the pig iron Bob story, to Japan, which was being used to murder people in China and Australia. She's made a documentary about that. So she spoke, and she was part of the tour, and it was something that we were honoured to be able to pay tribute to, even though it was a stinking hot day.
Yeah.
I mean, Hainan is tropical, and it was drowning in sweat. And the second one was Nanjing itself, because that's where Nanjing was the site of the worst massacre of the Eastern Theatre of World War II. It's the Eastern version of the Holocaust. 300,000 Chinese killed in 6 weeks by the Japanese army in that city. It used to be an ancient, one of the old capitals of China at one stage. And they've got a memorial there to the massacre. And it's very, very confronting going through that memorial, especially because there are people in the Japanese government now who are our allies, yet who actually openly deny their atrocities in World War II. And I made a TikTok post about that while I was there. But it's a history that should never be forgotten, and so we will help keep that memory alive.
And while there, we laid wreaths and had the honour of ringing the bell, which happens every morning on that site.
Yep.
And you'll see the pictures in the background there. All right, we're going to move on to talk about the economy of China, which of course is one of the most interesting things, and we've broken it up into several sections. But overall reflections on the economy is just, the dynamism of bustling cities. Of course, these are very big cities compared to Australian cities, although they don't really appear any different per se. It doesn't seem to be.
No, it's just they take forever to drive across.
That's right. They're just much, much bigger and more spread out. So that's the sense in which they're bigger. And they comprise, high-end sectors where you have, the most kind of capitalist vision you can think of.
The CBDs are as flash and glitzy as any in the world.
Yeah.
Right. In fact, often more so. And they've got all the global brands, the big global brands on display, etc. And you can see that there's a lot of wealth in China that's consuming all this stuff. But then we also saw the lower income areas, especially on Hainan, because we got to do so much travelling around the island. We saw these poor villages. But when we say poor, you would see a house, a very poor old house, and right next to it, a flash brand new house, right? That and someone pointed out to us, it's often the same person owns them, right? They're progressing from the way they used to live to a higher living standard.
Yeah.
Not everyone owns a Mercedes though.
No.
It seems that everyone owns a motorbike. And I just took these electric scooter motorcycles. To me, this is my biggest takeaway from China, literally. I think it's sort of emblematic of the country. on so many levels, including the fact that everyone's going about their business. They've got business to go about, and they don't stop for anything. They literally don't stop for anything because they've got business to do, and they're all buzzing around everywhere, and it's their affordable way of travelling, and they make the most of it.
Yeah. So yeah, people are busy, they're occupied, and even if they're poor, there's a sense of development, of forward national motion.
Yeah.
You know, with everything that we saw, you just see why. You can just imagine if Australia was developing and building in that way, you wouldn't have people who would want to be just sitting on the dole. They want to be participating in the development of the nation and the fact that they can personally progress by participating in that development.
And China is not big on welfare. Now, they do have a very basic safety net for people, but they want people to have good living standards. And so the whole approach of the various levels of the Chinese government is creating opportunities that people can take advantage of, right? And that's how their poverty alleviation program works. And there is opportunity there. And if you're in, Chinese are great in business, right? They're the best business people in the world in some ways. They always go, they'll always start a business somewhere. But if you're in China, and you got that many people as your market, right? Yeah. It's easy to run a business, to make a business work.
And that brings us to infrastructure, because when you do have that many people, you never get to a plateau where you say we've got enough infrastructure. You basically are always building infrastructure. I mean, here we are in the West with 100-year-old infrastructure that we've just left sitting there, and we've just done nothing in the meantime to build alternative infrastructure. One example is the Story Bridge, which is will have to be closed in 20 years if they don't rebuild it.
Yep.
So you can't do that. It's not a freeze frame. You have to be moving forward, and that's what you see in China. Everywhere you look out, the window of the bus you're travelling in, or even looking from the plane. I mean, when you look from a plane, you don't see kilometres and hundreds of kilometres of empty space like you do looking out of a plane in Australia. There's always something that you see below villages and towns, or outcrops of towns and cities.
So we got to ride on high-speed rail at 350 k's an hour.
Yeah.
You don't even know how fast it's going.
No.
You can't tell. You've got to look at the speedo that they have in every carriage, right? Then you go, really? Am I going that fast? We got to do that in a couple of times. We got to drive across bridges. Oh yeah,
everywhere
bridges.
You look out the window, of course, you see pylons. It's either a highway or a railway. Of course, we didn't see a single level crossing, because they build their trains either underground or above ground. So you're not cutting into agricultural or other space, but you have the raised
only in
trains.
Only in one city, Beijing. Two cities, Beijing and Chongqing, did you see even rail in the city, right? In both cases, are elevated rail, and in Chongqing, it's just monorail. Because everywhere else, you wonder, where are the trains? And the train stations aren't even that obtrusive. They're just these access areas to an escalator,
a little pop-up
to go down, because the station's underground. Yeah. Everything is underground, and it's completely out of the way. But their cities work.
And speaking of that elevated train in Chongqing, we'll put up the video that we took, because this is where China, they're committed to solutions. People might have heard of this famous region where the train goes straight through an apartment building. And the story is the train was already there, it had been built, but locals had a permit to build a residential complex there, and they weren't willing to give up that hard-won permit to build it. So they said, we'll build around the train line. So the train goes straight through, but it doesn't touch the apartment anywhere.
Yeah, no, that's right. So there's no vibration in the apartment, right? So they're totally separate structures, but that floor you can see is the train station in the apartment. The first few floors of that apartment are actually office buildings, offices for businesses, and then the upper floors are residential. And the residents, Elisa, get free train travel through the city, because they've made their apartment available. Their building available to the city for a train station. Here's a dramatic example of the power of infrastructure, though. So I mentioned Richard Yuan, who was our guide. He's Australian Chinese now, but he's from Hunan province, which is famous. If you've ever seen Avatar, that's where the movie Avatar was made. It's famous for its wonderful landscapes, etc. But Richard was proud of this story that when he left his hometown to go to the major city we visited called Changsha, which was the first time he left home as a 17 or 18-year-old. And this is his way. He's about to go out in the world that eventually brought him to Australia 25 or 30 years ago. It took him 9 hours to travel from his hometown to the capital city of his province. 9 hours.
Wow.
Today he can do that in 1 hour on a high-speed train, right? And so he, in his lifetime, attests to the progress of his home country, and he's only a little bit older than me. So many people in China, this is their lived experience: progress, progress, progress.
Yeah.
And it's a big contrast to our lived experience in the
quite
West.
the opposite. And I just wanted to mention, because these cities are so big, we had the experience of visiting a facility in Hangzhou called City Brain, which was absolutely fascinating, because you go into this building and they have all these live screens which shows where the traffic is, where are the log jams, and they use this information to immediately intervene to change the traffic conditions.
Including they had this one example, including by drones. They've got drones that if they see, if someone has parked inappropriately, for example, and is holding up traffic, the drone will immediately fly there, fly down, and
issue a warning.
When we were waiting to hear about the fine, right?
Yeah.
The first thought is not to fine the person.
Well, they threaten a fine. If you don't move within, they give them a time frame.
But give them a warning. Go. Yeah. Right? Come on, you're holding up traffic.
And the people go because they don't want to fine.
That kind of thing, right? Whereas in Australia, we know we have police on quotas to give us fines at the drop of a hat, right? Because they use revenue raising comes first.
Yeah.
That's my view. I'm sticking to it. You won't change my mind. I've had enough fines. I'm convinced it's revenue raising. But yeah, that's not their first action.
And that was integrated with other visuals that showed, population densities, the age of the population, aged care centres. So
that was their big the priorities for that particular centre was traffic control and healthcare.
Yeah,
because healthcare is all about intervening early,
access,
getting someone to where if you've got to get someone to the hospital, how do you make sure that you get there in time, all that kind of stuff. So that was their overwhelming concern. And it was the data was so fantastic. I even asked the question about privacy, and she was almost offended that not quite. The lady who was touring they make sure people's privacy is protected as well. It's not about being intrusive in people's lives. It's about making the city work best.
And just a final thing to mention in that infrastructure category is that we visited on Hainan Island a factory that produces components for prefabricated housing. And I can put up a bit of the video in the background there. Just, again, completely stunning, the level and the capacity at which they're generating this material, because, of course, they have to solve housing problems on a massive scale, and Australia can stand to learn a lot from that. And they're very, very open. In fact, they've got things in motion to work with Australia on this, as have other companies and facilities. There's certain issues to resolve, compliance and other issues, but this is the way we need to be heading. Now, I wanted to focus now on science and technology zones. I mean, China started its development with a focus on free trade zones and special development zones. So just mention a few of them. Hainan Island itself is, on the 18th of December, opening a new role as a free trade port, and we went through some stunning presentations on how this will be an access point to the broader Chinese market, where corporations that base themselves there on the island will only have to pay 15% corporate tax.
There's a category. They've basically got a list of all possible commodities in the world and products, and they have opened up that list to something like more than 70% of all possible products will be tariff-free going into Hainan Island. Now, Hainan is the smallest province, but you're tariff-free going in there, and if you add 30% value to your product in Hainan, so the locals benefit, then you get tariff-free access to the whole Chinese market, right? And this is their way of both supercharging Hainan's economy, right, and giving people a way to do even more trade with China proper, because of course everyone wants access to the China market.
Yeah. And then in Hangzhou, we visited a science technology museum. And when we went in, we'll put up a picture here, there's this big mural of a tree, and it reads in Chinese and English, and this represents the government versus the private sector. So it says, I, meaning the government, I am responsible for providing sunshine, rain and dew, while you, the private sector, are responsible for blooming and flourishing. In other words, we'll create the conditions.
We'll provide the infrastructure.
You go and do the work.
Start a business.
And then we went through seeing this entire display with models and everything of what they're building this science city, which has dedicated high technology facilities, factories, all kinds of things.
Alibaba is headquartered in this particular city. It was right next to this display we're at.
And when we asked the guides at the end, because if you went to something like this in Australia, if it existed, it doesn't, because we don't have these forward visions. You know, it would all be, in theory, it would all be, oh, we might build this by 2050 or something. Yeah. Well, we asked them, how much of this have you accomplished? And they said 80%. Yeah. And in fact, when we travelled around, we then started seeing some of the landmarks we'd seen in the model, these amazing stadiums and all kinds of things. In Shenzhen, which we visited, and we were travelling with the former ambassador, deputy ambassador to China, in the very first Australian embassy that opened up diplomatic relations with China. And this is John Lander, who you've seen on our Citizens Insight shows before. So he'd been in Shenzhen for the last time in the 1970s, when it was just a fishing village.
It was a fishing village and a state farm. That's all it was when he saw it.
And then, of course, this was one of the main...
well, it's one of China's 4 mega cities now, and it's the most advanced science city and science and technology and industry city in the world.
Yeah, so it was one of their first special economic development zones to open up China. And they're building, even though it's so advanced already, they're building another science city there called Guanming, which is also amazing. We won't focus in on all of the developments there, but I want to mention also an agricultural centre we went to in Xi'an, which is an initiative of the Belt and Road Initiative. And they are fostering cooperation in technology for advanced agriculture within all of Southeast Asia or Asia more generally, cooperation with Russia. And their complex was next to and cooperates with the Sun Yat-sen University, for instance. So you go and travel through these entire zones. And in fact, we went to an innovation zone in Chongqing. And Chongqing is a very beautiful city built on the side of a mountain, but it's also very big. And we travelled to the outskirts to see the first inland national development zone. So this is another development zone, but inland. And they had advanced testing systems where they take scientific research and they test it, and then they bring it to the commercialisation point with their advanced facilities. And they have...
These are all joint ventures with businesses and other universities and things.
And they have accommodation for the researchers, for students in this absolutely beautiful, again, put up pictures there.
I think there's a photo of me in this one. I took a photo next to the flying car.
Oh, yeah,
I want me a flying car.
And 3D printed shoes and all kinds of things.
That's right.
And Chongqing, by the way, just out of interest, one of the government officials we met said, you know, we produce, and this is the largest city in land area in the world, 5 times as big as Beijing. They produce 1/3 of all the world's laptops and 1/8 of all the mobile phones in the world. Now, I just wanted to mention some other factories we visited. Again, you see the scale of this. In Xi'an, we went to a truck production facility, which was amazing. We went into this building, which was just massive. Basically, 2 huge sheds side by side, creating one big building, which is about approximately 20 acres in size. And we went through and we saw these trucks being gas trucks, and they're developing them for electricity, hydrogen power and other forward-looking things. But apparently there's 50 of these facilities of this size producing these unbelievable vehicles, just brand new. You went to the BYD factory similarly, and a drone company.
BYD in Shenzhen makes absolutely everything, and we can put this graph up on. I took a photo on the wall. They've got the graph of their income, and it's just soared in the last few years, partly in response to what the Chinese government has done to say, look, increase manufacturing, because they popped the property bubble. They said, look, there's too much money in real estate in China. It's too expensive. We've got to get rid of that. And so the question is, well, how does the economy transition? It transition to manufacturing. You can see this in this graph.
And of course, the crucial backdrop to all of this is banking. So we mentioned the Post Office Savings Bank, the fact that there's bank branches everywhere. That's crucial in terms of the funding that goes into the private sector every day. And I mentioned last week some of the figures that, because of the regulatory control that the government has over banking, they're able to direct credit, as you mentioned, into the productive sector. And we were able to, because we're visiting all of these science cities and these development showcases, we were able to ask one government official at one point, do you get special funding from the government for this, or is this all done at a level of the province and the local government? And he said, no, absolutely, we get funding. The government issues bonds, and then that gets channeled into these development facilities. Otherwise, it wouldn't get done.
No. And of course, the bigger part of the banking system is their 4 big industrial state-owned banks, and they are the engine for the whole thing. And if you want to see how successful state-owned banks can be, go to China, and then you'll say, well, let's do that here.
Absolutely. And then just finally, we wanted to talk about the people-to-people relations, including with the man on the street as well as government officials.
Yeah, so we were lucky, right? Because we had a tour that was structured by an Australian-Chinese person who's a tourism expert, but also because we know the Chinese embassy in Canberra very well and the Melbourne consulate here very well, they are able to assist, not financially. This was all funded by the individuals who went and the Citizens Party. So this was all private in that sense. But they can make introductions. So we got to have access to people at government level in these different provinces and towns that we went to. And we also got access to the man on the street, right? Walking around the street, talking to people as much as you can. But we had a few people who could speak Chinese with us. And they're just the warmest, friendliest people you'll ever meet. Now, not uniquely, I'm sure there's warm, friendly people all around the world. But the reason I'm highlighting that is because we're in a country where we've got people trying to tell us that we should be afraid of this country, that these people are plotting our downfall, right? And then someone will say, no, the Chinese people are lovely. It's just the evil CPC. Well, we met CPC members too, because everyone in government is a member of the CPC. Well, we met a few who actually in government who weren't members of the CPC. They were members of another party. Yeah. There's other parties in China who contribute to the way China goes as well.
But they work together.
It's all about, they value harmony and consultation, right? And there's a whole big recurring consultation process to keep finding out what the needs of the people are so the government can meet those needs. And they're so warm, so friendly, so generous. That their hospitality was incredibly generous, and they love Australians. I mean, this is what at a certain point, I was almost embarrassed. I'm thinking, man, everybody has been so positive to Australians. They are far more positive to Australians than a lot of Australians have now been conditioned to think about Chinese people. And there is a big difference there, and it's not fair, and it's certainly not their fault. It's our fault that we've allowed people to condition us this way. But that positivity extends to the government officials as well. They want to do business with Australia. Very warm. It's not a plot, right? And they want to collaborate.
And the other noticeable thing was that a number of these officials expressed their desire to collaborate with Australia and to learn from Australia. I
Yeah.
mean, when you see their economy and you think about ours, you think, God, what could they learn from
They say that
Australia?
we want to learn from you, and you go,
Yeah.
hang on, we actually said this. You're so much more advanced. I go, no. They almost took offence at being told that. They said, no. They have an average income in China of $10,000 whereas Western countries, it's about $30,000 and they take that seriously. They want they're not a developed country yet. They're developing. They want to learn what's successful. We want to learn from what's successful. They see Australia as a successful, developed country, right? Well, it was. We're very painfully aware of the trajectory. We're not going forward. We're going backwards in many ways. But they're humble and they say, what can we learn from you?
And I just want to mention a couple of things finally in terms of those people-to-people exchanges. We were able to speak at some universities and have other interchanges, such as with the People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, which was in Nanjing. That's right. And John Lander got to speak at the famous East China Normal University at an Australia-China Relations Forum in Shanghai. So that was an immense privilege, and to meet some Australian professors who were over there for that event, as well as
lots of Australian academics and Chinese academics.
Yeah, very well-known Chinese academics as well. And then you and John both got to address the Beijing Foreign Studies University, which was an honour as well.
And can I say that our respective hosts in both those universities, the one in China, the one in Shanghai, the host was Professor Chen Hong. The one in Beijing was Professor Li Jingjing. These are probably China's two leading academic experts in Australia-China relations, and they're barred from coming to Australia. Actually barred. Chen Hong was Bob Hawke's interpreter when Bob Hawke toured China in the 1980s. And because of Scott Morrison in 2020, these two academics, who are wonderful people, are not allowed to come to Australia. That's how pathetic Australia actually is. So China has given Australians 30-day visa-free travel to China. We haven't reciprocated on that. We claim we want to get the Chinese tourists back. We had 1 million before COVID, but no, they got to apply for a visa and whatever.
Yeah,
no,
why would
reciprocation?
We do that?
No reciprocation, and we still bar true experts in the Australia-China relationship, pro-Australian people, from coming to Australia, because this was that Scott Morrison, that American agent who is now going around the world making money from America, from the war, from the tensions that he tried to create and flog us off AUKUS, etc. The guy he's the foreign agent, the guy should be in jail. He set out to sabotage this relationship and push us to the point of war. And Australians should be absolutely furious about that, because when you meet these people, just wonderful, normal people whose job it is as academics is to how can we contribute to the relationship, and we treat them like they're the enemy. It's disgusting.
And just to mention too, a lot of the provinces where we travelled, there were a lot of the local media and local associations reported very, very positively on this important people-to-people exchange.
We became a phenomenon at a certain point, but some cities like Shanghai, and Beijing, there's lots and lots of foreigners in those cities, so we didn't stand out. But there's plenty of other places where we stood out, including on the flight from Haikou to Nanjing, because there's a flight full of Chinese people, and when it landed, the flight attendants had asked Richard, our guide, they said, "What's this? Why are all these guilo, white devils, on our plane for?" And he said, "Well, we're part of this China Study and Goodwill tour, and he's the former ambassador to China or deputy ambassador." They insisted we stay on the plane while everyone else got off, and then they took a group photo with us,
we'll put that up.
right? Because they were so honoured to have us on their plane. One last thing, Elisa, because we're running out of time here, but one of the places we visited was the aviation museum at one of China's got about a dozen universities that are dedicated to aviation, and really fantastic. You see the history of Chinese aviation, but I've got to make a political point now. The idea that Dan Duggan training some Chinese test pilots for a few months in South Africa in 2012 in a 1960s plane somehow leaked all America's secrets to give China the edge on the world is an utter joke.
Oh my God.
It's an utter joke.
When you see the advancement.
The only thing Dan did was help. They needed a lot of training for pilots because their economy is growing so fast. People are traveling more. That's what he was assisting. And these idiots and not just idiots, quite sinister people have turned it into something that justifies him being in prison for a few years.
Yep. Now, we will report on this in future issues of our Australian Alert, but even this week you can read the speech that Robbie gave at the Beijing Foreign Studies University, for instance. So,
But for now, we're out of time.
Read more there. But thanks for tuning in and listening to it. Hopefully it was of interest. Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks, Lisa.
See you again next week.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.